This is the William Hill Sports Book Club. Summer 2026 brings another Football World Cup in Mexico, Canada and the USA. So on this show, we're looking at a stunning piece of work. It's called The Power and the Glory, A New History of the World Cup, written by the brilliant football writer Jonathan Wilson.
Everywhere I went in Qatar, every stadium, every media facility, every apartment, every hotel, you knew that had been built with the blood of migrant workers. And that is a really, really difficult thing to reconcile.
The book goes through every World Cup since the first one in 1930, all the way through to Messi's triumph with Argentina in Qatar 2022.
An incredible story, and his performances in small patches, his brilliance to carry Argentina, the way that nation, every other player in that team does what Messi needs to get the best out of him, because that gets the best out of them. And the Argentina fans in Qatar, all of that is incredibly uplifting.
The Power and the Glory by Jonathan Wilson is the focus on this episode of the William Hill Sports Book Club. Hi there, I'm Adrian Durham. This is the William Hill Sports Book Club. As ever, joined by William Hill's mega book reader, Neil Foggin. How you doing, Foggy?
Very well, yourself?
Very good. Really good to be here. And a privilege to be joined by the man behind this epic book, The Power and the Glory, Jonathan Wilson. Hiya, Jonathan.
Hi, how you doing?
Thanks for being with us. It is a sensational book. Congratulations on publication. It's huge as well. It's over 500 pages, but there's so many important words in it. I can see why it's so long.
I knew it was longer before they made me cut it back. So, yeah, I mean, that's the problem with doing a book on the whole history of the World Cup is it's 96 years or 95 years of history, trying to cram it all down. So you end up without a huge amount of space for each World Cup, but hopefully I've got everything we needed in there.
I think you've nailed it. I mean, you've written a lot of football books already, some brilliant books. What made you think that a new history of the World Cup was needed?
I think a lot of people have been put off, and I would include myself in this, by Brian Glanville's book, The Story of the World Cup, which was a huge influence on me growing up. And Brian was also an influence and became a good friend. And he actually died on the day of my stag do, which is quite weird. It was a strange moment in the evening where we're doing shots for Brian, but it was quite nice. A load of football journalists were there, and we could sort of pay tribute together. But then if you look back at that book, you realise, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but it's very much written from Brian's notebook. And journalists in that era, that's how you had to work. It was what you had seen, the people you had spoken to. Whereas I've got this great resource where I can go online, I can join up to the National Library of, say, Argentina, and for $5 or whatever, I can read every single newspaper ever published in Argentina, and I can use Google Translate to translate it. So that means there's a much greater depth, much greater variety of sources available to us now that are readily available. The FIFA library in Zurich, whatever else we might think of FIFA, the FIFA library is magnificent. And the people at that library should be exempted from all the criticism of FIFA because they are incredibly helpful and they have huge resources there. And also just getting in touch with people now is much easier than it was. That, if I want to find out a detail from Hungary or Iran, you just put a message on social media, can maybe help me out. And obviously you've got to do a bit of background check to make sure the person you're talking to is credible. But you quickly can find people who can help you out, point you in the right direction. So I think I realised that there was a need for a book on the World Cup from our generation of writers.
I think that there's so many anecdotes in the book and so many stories in the book that shines through the level of research. And Foggy, it's about football, it's about footballers, it's about games as well, it's about goals, it's about World Cups, so much more than that though, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and that's why I love this book, is because it takes you into that period of time, it takes you back, and it's how football is connected to history and politics and the time of that time, and you go back to that. And I think that's what I loved about this book, is that it's more than so-and-so played, so-and-so kicked it to so-and-so, and they scored a goal and they won the match. It's much more. Also, you can use it as a reference book, i.e. you can dip in and say, remember the 1974 World Cup, something happened there, and you can look into it. But again, you probably won't be able to come away from it that easily, will you? No, and I think that's the beauty of this book. It's definitely one of those where you can go, I want to look at the 1966 World Cup. You read that chapter, but you'll get addicted and you'll end up reading it like we do, cover to cover. Yeah, it's a narrative all the way through. It's over 500 pages of detail, Jonathan. Football detail, there's political detail, historical detail as well. How long did it take, start to finish? Actually, we're going to have a guess here. Both of us are going to have a guess. I'm going to say... so I'll go 2 years. What are you saying? 3 years.
3 years?
It depends what you mean by start.
Okay.
Because if I was being really pretentious, I started when I was 5 years old and watched the 1982 World Cup. Realistically, from contract to finish, it was about 21 months. So
Is that all?
I started it,
Wow.
I think, the March, and I finished it. The deadline was the end of the year, so I filed at 6 p.m. on New Year's Eve to make a point. Didn't do any work on New Year's Eve, but I did do some work on it, I think, on the 30th, because there's always, that's the problem with the book, it's never finished. You're always polishing bits and adding bits and taking bits out. So yeah, just under 2 years. So yeah, you win.
Yeah, I win. Thanks very much. We can all go now. At the end of the chapter on the first World Cup, you've unearthed a great quote from the South American sports publication El Gráfico, I think it is. It basically suggests the World Cup won't happen again. It's a brilliant quote. I love it. It talks about how the World Cup is a vehicle for great shows of a lack of culture, violent behaviour, passion and insults. Like passion's a problem. 100 years on, I think they got it wrong, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, El Gráfico it does have a sort of broader South American canvas, but it's very much an Argentinian, or it was very much an Argentinian magazine, sadly defunct now after 99 years. But I think they're writing from the perspective of Argentinians who are furious to have lost to Uruguay again. So they were furious that Uruguay won the 24 Olympics. And, the Olympics 24 and 28 are sort of de facto World Cups. Argentina didn't send a team to Paris, and Uruguay get this great glory. Everybody saying this is the greatest football we've ever seen. And the Argentinians think, oh, Uruguay, really? We're better than them. I mean, they weren't better than them. 28, they send a team to Amsterdam, lose in the final. And then 1930, they lose in the final to Uruguay again. So there's a backlash in Buenos Aires. Uruguayan people are attacked. But two governments break off diplomatic relations for a few months. I mean, that's how seriously they took it. So I can understand from the point of view of an El Gráfico journalist sitting there in Buenos Aires with all this going on. You're thinking, I'm not sure this was good. I think kind of we need to sort of calm this down. But yes, they were wrong.
Global travel back then was way more difficult. I could understand why there might be misgivings about whether a World Cup would catch on. I mean, it has caught on. It has worked. It's become absolutely huge. Why did it work, do you think? The idea of a World Cup.
I think, partly because football is the global game, and not just the global game. It is this is the historian Tom Holland said this, and I'd say he's a fairly new convert to football. But he makes the point that football is the biggest thing there's ever been. That there's never been a cultural mode that has been followed by so many people in so many different places at once. And you look at David Goldblatt's previous book, and he talks about, I think it's a village in Namibia, where they hadn't needed clocks, they hadn't needed time. They get up when the sun comes up, they herd their cattle or whatever it is they're doing. They go to bed when the sun goes down. You don't need to know, it's 3:37 until they're exposed to the Premier League. And then they need to know what time it is so they know when kickoff is. And that's a very, quite a humbling thing that our sport, what I still sort of slightly sort of parochially think of as our sport, it touches that many people in that many different places. I was in Ethiopia in 2015. I was in Lalibela, which is quite a remote village. Got some incredible rock churches while I was there. But it was the day of Chelsea v Liverpool as Mourinho was falling apart. And so desperate to watch that game. So I went to a restaurant for lunch and said, is there anywhere where I can watch Chelsea-Liverpool? And said, the restaurant manager's going to watch it, go with him. So I went to this cafe. You had to pay a small fee to get in. It's like 200 people there watching the telly. And then he said, do you want to come and watch Swansea v Arsenal? I'm like, okay. And he said, we'll go to a proper locals place. And it's sort of like a muddy bank with sort of benches hammered in, tarpaulin over top, big screen at the front. There must have been 500 people there. And again, you pay your fee to get in, and that's how the promoters, or whatever you want to call them, run the thing. And he said there's 5 places, these sort of screening rooms, screening halls in the village. A village of 20,000 people, plus all these cafes. So I realised there's something like 20-25% of the adult, very much male, but the adult male population of the village were watching Premier League football every Saturday.
Sensational. It is the global game, you're right, and it is our game. 1950, the Maracanã, I think this is built in Rio. Talk about it giving Brazil a soul. That's what they said about the stadium. Brazil were meant to win that World Cup, but they didn't, and it affected the whole nation, the fact that they lost again, Uruguay, ruining everybody's dreams yet again. And this is an example, I just picked that one out because it's an example of how the World Cup impacted history, impacted the path of a nation, of a country, of a people, and the psyche of a country as well, I think. And also, got to bear in mind that that World Cup defeat for Brazil at the Maracanã, it encouraged, inspired Pelé to go on to do what he did.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll start with Pelé, but he was a kid at the time. He was, 10 years old, I think, and very poor family. But he remembered that afternoon, I mean, the last game, not actually a final, but Brazil only needed a draw against Uruguay to win the World Cup. And because his parents were so poor, they didn't tend to have people around. But that afternoon, his dad gets all his mates around. They're all there drinking. They've got cakes. They're having food. This big party atmosphere. They're all there to listen to the radio. It's not even watching a TV. Listen to the radio to hear Brazil's glory. And then they concede 2 late-ish goals, lose the game 2-1. And Pelé says, it's the first time, I think the only time he ever saw his dad cry. And so he went and he had a crucifix on the wall in his room, the only sort of ornamentation in his room. And he knelt down and wept and asked Jesus why he'd let this happen. And then he went and hugged his dad and said, "Don't worry, I will win you one of these." And of course, 8 years later, he does.
Yeah, that wasn't the only one as well. Similarly, Germany, I think post-World War II, searching for an identity. They win the 54 World Cup, and I think that kind of turned around the mentality. It felt like, from reading your book, that turned around the mentality of that country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite a complicated story. So that is certainly how it was presented post-1990. But I think it's almost a back projection that the West Germany, the Bundesrepublik, needs its origin myth. And of course, its origin myth for Germans is pretty awful. It's the Second World War, it's Hitler, it's partition. But 54 is this moment where suddenly, at least up to a point, people could say, "I am proud to be German again." And so I think it's after reunification that it's almost back projected. But you see authors, filmmakers are playing with this idea. It's clearly a huge moment in the psyche of West Germany, that it is sort of the first step they take back onto the global stage. And that finally they can be proud to be West German. But then, of course, it sort of goes wrong pretty quickly that the head of the West German FA, Peckel Bauwens, he has this big celebratory party in a beer cellar in Munich, which red flags immediately. You sure that's where you want to have this celebration of German identity? And he gives this speech, which is broadcast live on Bavarian radio, where he suddenly starts off on all these pretty fascistic tropes, and they have to cut the coverage, and the tapes are mysteriously lost. And it subsequently emerges Peckel Bauwens, who'd done this big thing, I was never a member of the party, look, my wife was Jewish, which was true, but it turned out that he did not treat his wife well. He had a series of mistresses. His wife killed herself, and certainly Bauwens' children blame the father for her death, saying he drove her to it by he would lock her in the bathroom when he brought his mistresses home, and
Crikey.
yeah,
This is dark.
Some suggestion he might even have bought the sleeping drafts for her, or might even have mixed them for her.
Jeez.
Because she was known alcoholic, so they wouldn't have given her the sleeping drafts. She was on a sort of list at the local pharmacies. So
it's a very dark example, but it is an example of what you unearth when you go down this research rabbit hole of the World Cups. And there's so many more stories in there as well. It's the William Hill Sports Book Club. We're looking at the power and the glory, a new history of the World Cup by our guest, Jonathan Wilson. It's the William Hill Sports Book Club. Jonathan Wilson's written many football books. His latest is A New History of the World Cup. Let's talk about England's relationship with the World Cup. England's film industry back in the 60s was full of great farce, slapstick comedy, but nothing quite like the story of Pickles and the stolen World Cup, which is actually true. And the way you tell the story of Pickles the dog finding the World Cup and everything around it, we're talking about suburban dog walkers, we're talking about gangsters. The story is sensational. I actually think you should make the film of this. It's brilliant.
Why is it not a film already? It's incredible.
Yeah.
So basically, the FA put the World Cup, the Jules Rimet Trophy, on display. This is the March. So the World Cup starts in July, so 3-4 months before the World Cup. Westminster Hall, so slap in the centre of London. On a Sunday, so everything's closed, but Westminster Hall is open downstairs for a Methodist church service. There's a stamp exhibition where the World Cup is being shown on the first floor. And everybody involved is completely incompetent on every single level. It's a magnificent farce. Basically, the thieves end up breaking in, they unscrew the security bar across the back door, take that off, wander in, there's a small padlock on the back of the cabinet, clip that open, in they go, take it away. Nobody covers themselves in glory. The Times prints this description of the suspect who's been seen hanging around outside the ladies' toilets, which is, again, just a very carry-on detail. And the Times said he had a scar. Actually, if you go back to the witness statements, it's a scarf. So you got all these people looking for somebody with a scar, but no, he's just got a scarf on. And then Joe Mears, who was Secretary of FA, also Chairman of Chelsea, he sent a ransom demand. He has an angina attack, which he actually dies from 3 months later. So it's quite a dark story. But this is a great opportunity for the FA and the police, because they can legitimately say, look, he's in hospital with angina, brought on by the stress of the World Cup being nicked. So here's his deputy, who's actually an undercover police agent called D.I. Buggy.
Yeah, what a great name.
Yeah.
D.I. Buggy.
And then there's the handover where they go to Battersea Park. So if people know Battersea Park, just opposite the Prince Albert pub, that gate is where the handover happens. And of course, it's £15,000 as the ransom. So your classic sports bag, hand it over. Only the top layer of actual genuine notes. The rest is ripped up newspaper. Nobody bothers to check. And then Jackson, the pseudonym of the person who's sent the ransom demand, he said, I haven't actually got the World Cup. It's in Kennington. So you're going to have to get in the car with me. Well, I guess fair enough. You don't take the World Cup with you. But then as he's driving to Kennington, he says, see that van over there? That's the sort of van that Special Branch use when they're doing surveillance. Doesn't twig that they are actually doing surveillance. Eventually he realises by the time we get to Kennington, he runs for his court. He said, I'm just the go-between. I'm on the do with me. It's a bloke called The Pole. His identity's never been revealed. But Jackson's not his real name, but we'll stick with Jackson for the sake of argument. He had served time for handling stolen goods. So he's on the criminal map. He lived 2 streets from Charlie Richardson, the notorious London gangster, who at the time was involved in a gang war with the Krays. So that raises a couple of possibilities. A, is he stealing the World Cup, believing it inaccurately to be made of solid gold? It wasn't, it was silver with gold plate. So people thought it was worth about £3,000 in bullion. Actually, probably about 50 quid.
Oh.
So did he think this could help fund his gang war with the Krays? Or, I think much more intriguingly, he had committed a murder in South Africa. He'd been tried in absentia and convicted and was facing the death penalty in South Africa, and the South Africans had applied for him to be extradited. He then was contacted by the Bureau of State Security, BOSS, the notorious South African, what a name BOSS is, but obviously awful people, but good name. The South Africans do this deal with him, say, look, if you can raid the offices of the African National Congress, the anti-apartheid body, we'll sort of turn a blind eye. We'll forget your conviction. So he does this on the same day that the World Cup was nicked, less than a mile from where the World Cup was nicked. So could it be that BOSS have said to him, this is 3 weeks before the general election, Howard Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister, is very anti-apartheid. He's annoying to the South Africans. So could it be that BOSS have said to Charlie Richardson, look, humiliate England, make them look totally incompetent, which they really do, to be fair. And on his way home from raiding the ANC offices, they think, right, we'll nick the World Cup as well. It's on the way. Because I can't believe that Jackson would have got himself involved in a caper without at least running it by Charlie Richardson. He's part of that milieu. He knows Charlie Richardson doesn't like, no gang boss is going to let this sort of thing go on his watch without at least having sort of given it the nod.
You see, I mean, it's such a great story. And I think before I read your book, all I knew was that Pickles found the World Cup. It had been told he found the World Cup.
So we should sort of just finish the story to say that the World Cup is dumped in West Norwood. Again, could anywhere be more suburban. And this Thames lighterman called Dave Corbett, again, perfect name. He goes out to make a phone call at a public phone box with Pickles, his 1-year-old collie, and Pickles sniffs out this mysterious package behind his neighbour's a car on his neighbour's drive. And then they take it to Beulah Hill Police Station, having worked out what they've got, and they hand it over to a desk sergeant who goes, "It's what? The World Cup? It doesn't look very World Cuppy."
World Cuppy. That's a word. It's brilliant. And actually, we won't, the spoiler at the very end, we won't reveal, but the last scene of the film they're going to make of this. Where
Pretty dark.
You've got a cameo as boss, I think, in this film. But the last scene involving Pickles, I think, is a very fitting scene. They could do that in a comic way, as dark as it is. It's like Tom and Jerry, he's chasing a cat. Come on. It'd be brilliant. But that's an example of one of the great stories with the detail in there as well. It's absolutely fantastic. England had a disdain for the World Cup, didn't they, from the off? And we've looked up a phrase that's in the book. You can tell me more about it. Magnifying the midgets was how England viewed the rest of the world playing in a World Cup, wasn't it?
Well, that quote's actually from 1919 from Charles Sutcliffe, who's on the FA committee. He's actually talking about a dispute with FIFA over the readmission of Germany after the First World War. And he sort of says, well, yeah, if we start listening to Russia and places like that, that's the case of magnifying the midgets. But that attitude, and Charles Sutcliffe is still on the committee before 1930. And FIFA, I mean, the home nations have all withdrawn from FIFA in an argument over definitions of amateurism, which mattered for the Olympics. You know, you have to be an amateur to play in the Olympics. And different countries apply different regulations. One of the things that they wanted to bring in was you could get what were called broken time payments. So you could be recompensed for the money you would have made at your job had you not been playing football at the Olympics. Okay. And the FA said, no, if you're an amateur, you don't do that. Jules Rimet, who I think is actually a great figure, really heroic figure, I think the best FIFA president we've ever had, both in terms of his actual capacity on an administrative level and just doing things right, not being a thief, not being corrupt. He's very opposed to amateurism. He thinks, no, amateurism means that working class people can't play sport to the level they should be able to. That's one of the reasons why he wants to set up the World Cup in the first place. But yeah, Sutcliffe and other people on the FA committee say, no, we don't want to be part of the World Cup. FIFA said, you can play. You don't have to be a member of FIFA. You can still play in the World Cup. We don't want a part of it because the home championship, the four nations, that is the truest test.
Yeah, they turned down an invite, I think, to 34
34 as well.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's easy to overreact the other way and say, well, this is ridiculous. Of course they wouldn't have won it easily. But what I would say is, and I do say this as a Sunderland fan, but Spain pushed Italy, who win 34. Spain probably pushed them harder than anybody else. And Spain's warm-up for that World Cup was to play a series of 3 friendlies against Sunderland, none of which they won. So Sunderland would have won. Basically, Sunderland were 1934 world champions, is what I'm saying.
He is a Sunderland fan, by the way. Yeah. The English relationship with England's relationship with the World Cup over the years, I think, is it's brilliant. You also did a book, The Anatomy of England, which was 10 England games over the years, which kind of defined their history. I can recommend that as well. It's a brilliant read. And obviously some involve the World Cup. But even in '66, when they won it, there were some stereotypical English headlines. There was an angry reaction to a goalless draw in the group stage, for example. Ramsey's team selection was criticised, and the papers calling for Jimmy Greaves to return. Also, and I hadn't seen this quote before I read your book, they described Jimmy Greaves as a luxury, a goal-scoring luxury, I think it was, something like that. And I'd never seen that before. And that argument about Greaves and whether he should have come back was big at the time. But it's amazing how the headlines don't really change. I can remember in Qatar, England got a 0-0 in the group stage. There was people furious about a 0-0, same as '66.
Yeah, so the first game in '66 against Uruguay. And it is the opening game of the World Cup. Everybody's very excited by it. And it is an awful game of football, in which England, I think, had 15 shots and Uruguay 1. So they've been the better side. But Arthur Ramsey was obsessed by... I mean, he had a real problem with South American teams. There'd been a tour of South America in '64 where they'd been heavily beaten by Brazil and also beaten by Argentina. And his whole thing was, if you push up too far, they will get in behind you. So we have to retain that solidity. And I think it's the difference you see between a manager who wants to win the tournament, doesn't really care what he has to do that, and a public who want to be entertained. And I think that's a constant tension. And I think it happens much more with the national team than with club teams, because I think the national team in the World Cup draws in non-expert fans, people who would sort of dip out of football for a couple of years and they come back for the big summer tournaments. And they're suddenly sort of, oh, this is boring, I want to be entertained. And maybe people who are more used to going to football every week are sort of, well, being bored is part of it. Being bored is part of winning the World Cup. And certainly Gareth Southgate, his whole thing was win your first game, draw your second, then you're through, and there's no pressure. And you've seen, with England winning the under-21s last twice, that's exactly what they've done under Lee Carsley, both of them. So it works. Yeah,
it does. I mean, it's just getting through the groups, like getting through qualifying, get through the group, and then you can approach the knockout stages differently. The reaction to not winning a game, though, in the group stage, I think it's just not changed over the years. There's one, I think the only minor issue I've got, if you don't mind, with the book,
please,
is that there are only 5 lines on the hand of God. Now, I've analysed why I'm upset about this, okay, and I think it is my fault. Okay, so Maradona's handball against England. Even in the photos, you got a photo of the second goal, the great goal, but not a photo of the hand of God goal. Is it because I'm English that I think that this is one of the most incredible, to Argentinians, iconic, biggest moments in World Cup history? And yet in your book, there's only, of 500 pages, only 5 lines on it?
Well, the 5 lines specifically on the handball, but that whole chapter is about, I think it's called The Gaucho's Revenge. And my argument is that entire game, Maradona is this representative of the Gaucho spirit. The book goes into this in detail to prove, just accept it's true.
Yeah.
That,
read the book, yeah.
Basically, Britain kills the Gauchos by importing barbed wire into Argentina. That you suddenly don't need a cowboy to control these huge herds of cattle because barbed wire will do the job for you. When the British withdraw from Argentina just before the First World War, you have this immigrant nation looking for, who are we? What is it to be Argentinian? There's people from Italy, from Spain, you've got Jews, you've got Arabs, you've got Irish, Germans, French, British, huge mix, melting pot. And football is hugely important because it's wanting Argentinians to win football matches is one of the few things they've all got in common. But because of that, the way the national team plays becomes an incredibly important projection of national identity. And there's these debates throughout the sort of 1912, 1913, what is Argentinianness? And Leopoldo Lugones, the great poet of the age, he says the true Argentinian spirit is to be found in the figure of a gaucho, the cowboy from the Pampas. He sort of roams the prairies alone. He's this heroic figure who's got this great virtuosity. But Argentina is urbanising rapidly, so where in a city do you find this gaucho spirit? And you have these gaucho revivalist clubs, but they're kind of ridiculous. People in fancy dress going to barbecues, which is great. And I absolutely, when I go to Argentina this week, will be going to a barbecue. Will not be dressing as a cowboy.
Why not?
But just hand luggage, it's difficult.
I need the photos.
But grilling meat is a huge part of Argentinian culture because of that. And so El Gráfico, the magazine we mentioned earlier, they say, well, actually, you find this spirit of a gaucho in the pibe, the urchin child of the streets. And the pibe learns how to play on these rough, uneven surfaces, mass games. There's no space. You've got to have great technical ability, great close control, but you've also got to be able to look after yourself. You've got to be able to use your elbows. You've got to be able to bend the rules. You've got to have both the streetwiseness and the virtuosity. And this is in direct contradistinction to the English, who learn their football on big grassy playing fields in schools, where the game is not about tight technical skill, it's about running and about stamina. And you've got a teacher there with a whistle if things get out of hand. You don't have to look after yourself, the teacher will do it for you. And so this debate goes on through the 20s. 1928, Borricotto, the great editor of El Gráfico, writes a very, very famous passage where he says, if we were to erect a statue to the spirit of Argentinian football, it would depict the pibe, his teeth worn down by eating yesterday's bread. So he's a poor kid from the streets. And he paints this incredibly vivid portrait that if you take it out of context and give it to somebody and say, who is that? 100% of people will say, that is Diego Maradona. He talks about him being squat, dark hair. And so when Maradona's born, almost immediately people recognise this. That description is 49 years before Maradona's international debut. Maradona arrives as the designated Messiah. And so the fact that his greatest game is against England, it is the Gaucho's revenge. And it is, the 2 goals represent the 2 sides. There's the virtuosity of the second goal, but also the streetwiseness, the cunning of the first goal. So there's only 5 lines describing the hand of God itself, but the entire chapter is about the spirit that leads to that.
It's a great explanation, and it's just dawned on me that literally everybody knows about the hand of God. So you'd be describing something that we all know about anyway. So in that respect, it does make sense. Just very quickly, I just want to point out, Foggy, with England and the World Cup, there's an incident when England go out in Italia 90. And I think what you've done is you've got a lip reader to work out what Bobby Robson has said to Gaza. The extent of research for this book is phenomenal, right?
Yeah, and that's why it's on the long list, because if you put the hard work in, you get the payback, and it's great.
It's superb. There's so much detail in there. It's the William Hill Sports Book Club. The Power and the Glory by Jonathan Wilson, longlisted for William Hill Sports Book of the Year Awards, and we're with the author on Book Club for this show. Jonathan Wilson is with us. I want to talk about World Cup goals in a moment, but you've got a question about what his favourite World Cup is.
Yeah. Before you started the book, what was your favourite World Cup, and has that changed with all the research you've done?
So I think everybody's favourite World Cup is their first. I think you're quite an odd person if that first rush of this is the World Cup isn't the one that absolutely sweeps you along. So 82 was my favourite. You had the great Italy-Brazil game. You had England being quite good and going out without losing a game. You had West Germany being evil. You know, sort of. We talked about West Germany, sort of the importance of 54 for projecting the nation. But by the late 70s, early 80s, they've really sort of re-embraced the sort of nasty German stereotype. They're a horrible, strutting, arrogant team by 82, which carries on probably to 1990. That begins to soften again, say by 2006. There's a massive reaction against that. So there's a huge amount in 82. In terms of ones I've been to, which I guess is a slightly different question, Russia. I mean, I'm well aware of the problems with Russia, but just in terms of experience, that was great. But the one I actually enjoyed writing about the most was 74. Just because so much goes on. So you've obviously got total football, which is what everybody knows about. You've got West Germany defeating. Yeah, I guess that's when they first embraced their inner Darth Vader. But you've also got Zaire there as the first black African side at a World Cup. You've got Chile there, having got through their playoff because the Soviets refused to play in Estadio Nacional in Santiago, which has been used as a torture and detention centre following the Pinochet's coup against Salvador Allende, the elected Marxist leader of Chile. You've got João Havelange is elected president of FIFA to replace Stanley Rouse a week before the tournament, which thrusts FIFA on this path of corruption, commercialism. You've got West Germany is in a state of paranoia because of what had happened, the terror attack at the Olympics in 72. The Cold War is absolutely at its peak, partly heightened by the oil shock of late 73. Suddenly there's a recognition on the part of Western Europe and North America that actually we need the Middle East. The Middle East is really economically important, and if they band together and change the oil price, that really has significant implications for us. You've got Willy Brandt, the West German Chancellor, who had this his Ostpolitik, his policy of trying to improve relations with the East. Suddenly, in the April before the tournament, so 2 months before the tournament, his chief advisor turns out he was a Stasi spy. So there's this great sort of Le Carré sort of feel to it. I think the fact that it rains so much gives it this sort of damp, decaying, very Le Carré atmosphere. And the fact that West Germany pretty much go on strike, well, not pretty much, they do threaten to go on strike on the eve of the tournament. And you've literally got Helmut Schön. Actually, Helmut Schön is somebody who I came out of the book with enormous respect for. I just didn't know his backstory, that he had lived in Dresden, that his family had been very liberal. They'd still been renting a flat to a Jewish family right up to 1938, where they literally legally had to stop. And then he's caught up in the firestorm. And the story of him looking for his dad that he tells in his autobiography, one of the most moving, vivid passages I've ever read, just extraordinary. And then he ends up falling out with Erich Honecker and what's he called, Mielke, the guy who runs the East German doping program. And Sepp Herberger, the West German coach who'd never really gone with. Herberger saw him as being a bit soft and a bit middle class. But he writes him and says, look, I need to get out of East Germany. This is before the wall's gone up. But Herberger gets him on a coaching course in Cologne. But then he still has to sneak out, him and his family, in the dead of night. So Schön comes out of this. I had not known all that background. And even in 66, he's saying to his players, look, winning is important, but being a gentleman is more important. We have to prove we are worthy of the world's trust again. And then by 74, there's the players demanding more money, and Schön is broken by this. You know, he ends up essentially having a breakdown. His food has to be mashed up for him. He can't eat it. And Franz Beckenbauer sort of takes over. And sort of Franz Beckenbauer really is the de facto manager for that tournament.
The 74 chapter, I think, it's my favourite chapter because of all the stuff you've just mentioned. Plus the fact there's an East Germany, West Germany derby in there that East Germany win, which I think is a sensational story. So, and the fact that he's defected and is in charge of West Germany, it makes it an even more incredible story. In terms of your favourite World Cup, you just talked about that. World Cup goals as well. There's lost goals. I was fascinated by this. Is it János Farkas's volley for Hungary against Brazil in the 66 World Cup? I'd never seen this goal before. And when you mention it in the book, I looked it up, and it's a really good move. Fantastic cross and volley. Superb goal. But I want to know what your favourite goal is from the World Cup, because you talk about Cambiaso's team goal in
2006.
Argentina beat Serbia.
Serbia, Montenegro, yeah.
Also, Archie Gemmel's goal. What I will say at this point, in 1978, when they beat Holland 3-2, your demolition job on Scotland 78 and Alan McLeod in the book. I mean, as a literary demolition job, it's right up there with Jonathan Swift once turned down a marriage proposal of Jane Waring in the late 17th century, and I thought that was evil. This is just fantastic.
Well, thank you. More evil than Swift. That's,
absolutely.
I'll take that.
What a comparison. But there's been some great goals. Nacho and Pavard, I think, scored for Spain and France, respectively, scored almost identical goals in Russia at that World Cup. Some brilliant goals down the years. So what would be your favourite World Cup goal?
I mean, I really like Lineker's second against Poland in '86.
Right.
A very simple break. I think Barry Davies' commentary is brilliant, but it's just it's a break. I think it's Trevor Steven. Ball's playing to Trevor Steven on halfway, and he sort of spins and hits it over his right shoulder. And then is it Beardsley runs down the left?
I think it is.
And puts in the cross, and Lineker's coming on it now, as the commentary goes, and he sort of just, I don't know, his foot is still. He sort of, it's just his, he doesn't kick it, he just sort of lets the ball hit him and flies in.
It's technique, yeah.
And it's it's a crucial goal for England because they had to win that game. They've been a bit edgy, they've taken the lead, and then that's the second where you think, it's safe, they're through.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that clearly. I mean, obviously, I was still at school just about then, and we were going out. We'd been dreadful, 0-0, 0-1 to Portugal. And we were going out, and he's made these changes, and that was a big moment. And it was late at night, as I recall as well. This is just from memory. The commentary sticks with you too, and those goals that you're 3-up and with a Lineker hat-trick by half-time, and you realise, I can relax now.
Yeah, and I say that. I mean, I'm not somebody who's massively sort of pro-England at tournaments, but that sticks with me. I think, and again, this is not a great goal, but for what it symbolised, Paolo Rossi's third goal against Brazil in '82. I don't know. I definitely wanted Italy to win that game against Brazil. Maybe because I was just awkward and difficult.
Nothing changes.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I got a bit bored of the whole. Look at Brazil being amazing. But you look back at them.
How dare they be good?
Yeah, their game against the Soviet Union, the 2 goals they scored. I mean, that game's also incredible. If you find the original footage of that game, the original, I think it was on ITV, the original programme they put out. And the ceasefire in the Falklands is declared in the middle of the first half. So there's an astonishing moment. And I'll tell you how sad I am. I had a supplier, a Romanian guy who lived in Toronto, used to burn these DVDs, and you get a deal if you bought 20 together or whatever. So got this load over, and there's one Valentine's Day when me and another Guardian journalist, Rob Smythe, had nothing else on. I was like, let's just watch some of these DVDs. So we're sitting there watching Brazil v the Soviet Union from '82. We weren't expecting this at all. Midway through the first half, it's like, major breaking news from London. We're going to go back to Brian Moore in the studio. And there's Brian Moore, sort of very nervously with his telex, or whatever you call it, in his hands, sort of hands almost shaking as he reads it out, saying the ceasefire has been declared. And then because he's a football broadcaster and he knows nothing better to do, he turns to his right and goes, "What do you make of that, Laurie?" And Laurie McMenemy, thankfully, had a former guardsman, so he's able to go, well, obviously, I'm delighted for the lads over there, eh? And if you're doing sort of a pastiche of what would the world look like if we only had football coverage, You could not have done it better than that.
Remarkably, I've got an echo of that very same story. I used to do a phone-in on talkSPORT with Laurie McMenemy. Absolutely a wonderful human being. He was good company. And there was breaking news in the middle of one of our phone-in shows. So we're taking calls from Man United fans who think they might not win the title and Fergie's got to go. This is how long ago it was. And there was some breaking news that the Queen Mother had passed away. And so my producer said in my ear, ask Laurie what he thinks. And I'm like, well, right, okay. But because of his history, he'd actually met the Queen Mother several times. And we got a little bit fortunate in terms of the fact that he could talk about it. So I turned to Laurie and said, Laurie, this is really sad news. And he says, she was a lovely lady. It's just the most perfect little clip. He's the right man to have on football and breaking news as well, Laurie McMenemy. The 1970 World Cup is a really interesting one because that fourth goal, which, by the way, at the start of that 70 chapter, your description of Carlos Alberto's rasping drive is brilliantly done. You can see it as you're reading the words. It's fantastic writing. But I come away from that chapter and it feels to me like you didn't rate that World Cup as highly as the rest of us, or have we got kind of a mythical image of how that World Cup unfolded? That
was actually the first chapter I wrote. Partly because I had this idea that I should start in the middle and work outwards. Partly because I had this sense of, I think people get that World Cup quite badly wrong. Look, Brazil are brilliant, don't get me wrong. But what I found really baffling was going back to the contemporary reports, certainly in British papers, and nobody mentions the fact that Brazil was a military dictatorship. Nobody mentions the fact that Mexico was a sort of quasi-military dictatorship, which is bizarre because they'd hosted the Olympics 2 years earlier, and just before that Olympics, there'd been a massacre of students. About 5,000 students were killed. And there was a Guardian journalist called John Rodder was on the balcony above the square, literally ducking as the bullets are flying down. And he writes an absolutely incredible piece. He must have, when it was safe, he must have just run from there to a phone and phoned it straight through. Because it's this breathless, it's sort of all over the place in terms of structure, but you get a sense of just the horror, the adrenaline that's going through him. So people knew, and they don't mention it. And I found that really baffling. But I also think the way it's talked about in 1970, and I think the way it's been talked about since, is this is sort of the apogee of football. This was the bright future we could have had. But it seems to me it's very old-fashioned football. That in 1966 you had pressing, I guess it's a little bit there in 62. 66 is the first time pressing is there from the majority of competing nations. Ramsey's England absolutely pioneers of pressing, which for some reason we don't talk about. I think because Ramsey was so sort of reticent with the press, he never explained his own genius. And I think he was a genius. I think he gets a very bad press. I think he's a much greater figure than is acknowledged. But you can't press when it's 35 degrees and you're playing at 8,000 feet or whatever. And so you get this sort of more individualistic football. I think Brazil is still, you look at the way that midfield five works. In fact, there is a midfield five, which seems a much later development. Yes, apart from Gilmar, they're all, sorry, apart from Gerson, they're all very technical, creative players. Gerson, a great long-range passer. But they do hunt in packs. There's a limited pressing there. But it's a throwback. It's not a herald of a new future. It's what football was, because there's not the physical capacity to press that you would get later. And actually, if you look at it, Brazil pull a couple of fast ones in terms of where they play, which dressing rooms they get. So yeah, I've got reservations about that. I came away. I think the comparison I'm making in the book is, it's actually a bit like Woodstock, that it's held up as this sort of great festival of beautiful football, this great, this is the future we could have had, this is when we had hope. And you actually look at the detail and you realise, Woodstock, people ripped down fences, hundreds of thousands or thousands of people got in without paying, which could have caused catastrophe. They found a live wire near a puddle, and if the water got on that, who knows what might have happened. Loads of the acts are very late. It's actually chaotic. The sort of documentary we've seen of it came out in March 1970, I think. The Woodstock itself is the year before, 69. That paints a very sanitised, very hagiographic portrait of it. And I sort of feel we've done the same in 1970, that it's not really what we hope it could be. And you look back and you realise the refereeing is awful, like really terrible refereeing. So yeah, I hate to sort of rip down the sort of the monument, but just to sort of try and put it in a bit more context.
He's killed off the 1970 World Cup there. It's the William Hill Sports Book Club. We're looking at the power and the glory and new history of the World Cup by our guest, Jonathan Wilson. It's the William Hill Sports Book Club. We've got Jonathan Wilson with us, author of The Power and the Glory, a new history of the World Cup. Neil Foggin from William Hill. When we both finished the book, you had a moment, didn't you? You were messaging me about the book. I was replying. All of a sudden you said to me, my light bulb is fully on. Jonathan has cracked this book. I was intrigued, but I thought I'll save it for the show. I think you were talking about the fact the book is about football, but it's much more than that. The role, the global importance of the World Cup. Is that your point?
Yeah, and I think I went back over my notes and read the prologue, and it's on page 3, isn't it, when he's talking about it's a tool for self-projection and the influence peddling of the role it's played in the national building and about the role increasing players as countries negotiate their positions in a globalised world. And I thought, wow, this all makes sense.
Yeah.
And everything just sits together. And I'm not a huge football fan, but this book, it was the stories around the stories of the trophy going missing, Escobar being involved, all these little stories just brings it to life.
I think the 1978 chapter is a great example of what you're talking about there, Foggy. Glory in a time of terror. So the World Cup in Argentina had a backdrop of a military junta, thousands of Argentinians missing or murdered. At the bottom of page 244, top of page 245, there's a paragraph that says the contradiction between the football on the one hand and what it represented, what it meant, who benefited, was never reconciled. And I think that is fundamentally what we're talking about. This has irked me a little bit, that over the years I've loved World Cups because, like yourself, when we watch them as children, it becomes part of us, part of our history. It's a marker of time. But we also love the football, love the events. Then in our careers, we've been lucky enough to get to World Cups, and it takes on a whole new meaning, and it's even more fantastic, how I feel about it anyway. And yet there's this dark side to World Cups, particularly in the modern era. It goes back to Mussolini, pre-World War II. That there is a dark side to it. So at times I almost feel guilty about loving the World Cup so much. Should I?
No, I don't think so. I think it's important to recognise both. The football can be brilliant and beautiful and uplifting, and I think Qatar was a great example of this. That we had the Messi story, and what we thought was going to be his last World Cup, and now looks like he might play next summer. But an incredible story, and his performances in small patches, his brilliance to carry Argentina, the way that nation, every other player in that team does what Messi needs to get the best out of him, because that gets the best out of them. And the Argentina fans in Qatar, all of that is incredibly uplifting. And I was at the Argentina-Netherlands quarter-final where our colleague Grant Wall died. And it was a really difficult thing that I'd seen somebody I'd worked with for 11 years dying 20 feet to my left at the same time as watching Messi. And there's this sense with Messi in that World Cup that every game is this the last time we're going to see him on the world stage? Is this sense of mortality hanging over everything? And then you get the very brutal fact of mortality happening in the press box. And I sort of realised that Messi's genius, that is what we hold against the void. It is that creativity, genius is not too strong a word for it. And that's the best of which humanity is capable. But there is this awful backdrop. And in Qatar, I think death was very present. It was very present in Grant's death. But it was also present in, I don't know if you found that, but everywhere I went in Qatar, every stadium, every media facility, every apartment, every hotel, you knew that had been built with the blood of migrant workers. And that is a really, really difficult thing to reconcile. And there was just this fundamental grimness about Qatar, the knowledge of what it cost to build in terms of human life, in terms of human suffering. And yet, on top of that, you have the beauty and the brilliance of Messi in Argentina.
Yeah, you're right. And I think I've always shied away from those conversations about what was your favourite stadium in Qatar because we know what happened and how they were built and the speed at which they had to be built, because there was literally nothing there when FIFA awarded the World Cup to Qatar. So very difficult conversations to have. But at the same time, I can think, well, Lusail was an absolutely magnificent stadium. But there's part of me feels very guilty for saying that. I think it was summed up by, in the 78 World Cup, there's a quote from Fiol, the Argentina keeper. And his quote is, it's in the book, "None of us tortured or killed anyone. We just helped our country have a bit of joy, and we defended the Argentinian colours with bravery. I cannot be ashamed of that." And it's a moving quote, very moving quote, because he clearly knows what's being talked about here. But he's a footballer who's literally just keeping goal for Argentina, and he just wanted to win a World Cup, and he ended up doing it.
And the truth is, most of those players at the time probably weren't aware. I've written a book on Argentina. I've got a lot of friends there. I spent a lot of time. I used to live there. And eventually conversations with older people do tend to drift back to 78. And the vast majority of them say, we had no idea. So there's a university professor I know who he would go to one of the smaller Buenos Aires teams, and he said literally the back of the stand, back of the small terrace he'd stand on, he now knows that people are being tortured on the other side of the wall, and he had no idea.
Wow.
And so I think it's genuine when they say they didn't know. I'm slightly more sceptical of Brazil in 1970 because the military was so present in terms of the planning of the tournament and everything.
Connected to the team, weren't
they?
Really?
The fitness instructors and things were from the military. So I think they probably had more of an idea. I don't really blame them. What they're going to do, But you talk to people like Fijol or Vicky Villa or Ozzy Ardiles, and I think they feel the victory of 78 is not appreciated as much as 86, because 86 is clean. Whereas 78, there is that taint there. And of course, the game against Peru, where they need to win by 4 clear goals to make the final, to put Brazil out, and they win 6-0. And I've got very mixed feelings about that game, because I think if you watch the video of that, you see Peru with nothing to play for. They put up a bit of a fight. The atmosphere is incredibly intense. It's in Rosario, it's in the Arrecife, so even intenser than the Monumental. It's really tight on top of you, 45,000. And in the middle of the second half, they obviously just go, what's the point? Go on. But equally, they get visited in the dressing room by Videla, the head of the junta, plus Henry Kissinger. What's he doing there?
Yeah.
So I did email Henry Kissinger's office. This is before I did the Argentina book. I emailed his office and what was he doing there? Did he have these conversations that the Peruvian players say he had with them? And just got the message back, Dr. Kissinger has no recollection of this incident, which I feel he said to a lot of lawyers in the 1970s.
Wenger's I didn't see it.
Yeah.
By the way, the book on Argentina, Angels with Dirty Faces, one of my favourite ever football books, so do check that out. You've written some good ones, and this is definitely among them.
But I mean, sorry, just on that World Cup, the most moving story, I think, is the one I start with, which is some of the prisoners who were at the ESMA, the sort of the Naval Academy, which is only 15 minutes walk from Monumental. They could hear the crowd from their cells. And that night, El Tigre Acosta, one of the most notorious of the torturers, takes 3 of them out in his car to show them the celebrations. And so I talked to one of the women who'd been there, and she was saying that she still doesn't know what he was doing. Was he trying to sort of show some humanity and let them share in the celebrations? Or was he saying to them, nobody cares. Nobody cares about freedom when they won the World Cup. Look. And she said she had this realization. There's a sunroof. She said she could have put her head out the sunroof and shouted to people, I've been disappeared. I am being tortured in the Naval Academy. And she says she realizes nobody would have turned away from the celebrations.
There's so much in this book. It really is worth reading. There's a quote, read Brazil 2014, the World Cup is a justification for manifest abuses of human rights. I mean, you need to read it, just the whole chapter and the whole book really, just to kind of make sense of a sentence like that and understand exactly where that's going. The last line of the epilogue makes me feel a lot better. It balances the corruption, the horrors and the death that have come with World Cups over the years, balances that with the joy of football, which is a very real thing as well. Foggy's big question is?
What's the next book?
That is a big question. So I'd really like to do a book similar to this, but about the European Cup / Champions League, which I think would be a much more straight economic history of, well, the history of neoliberalism told through football, probably, going from 1955 through to the present, and how the European Cup was this great quest. People like Brian Clough, it was the ultimate for them. and how it's become this sort of enormous commercial behemoth. So I'd love to do that. I'd love to do a history of Yugoslav football. I'd love to do a history of the Cup of Nations. I'd love to do a biography of Jock Stein, to do it from a non-Scottish perspective, if that's possible. Might take some of the political issues out of it. And I'd like to do a history of football under the Third Reich.
Well, what are you doing here? You better get going then.
Well, I need a deal. So publishers, come to me.
Brilliant. Well, congratulations on it's a brilliant book. Absolutely loved it. And congratulations on making the long list as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
And thanks very much for being with us, Jonathan Wilson. Foggy, thank you very much as well. Previous shows are available as podcasts. Just search for William Hill Sports Book Club and on the talkSPORT YouTube channel as well. November is awards month, so watch out for a special show on talkSPORT 2 covering the ceremony and revealing the winner for 2025. We'll see you next time on the William Hill Sports Book Club.